Chapter 2, Using Mad Question Asking to Finally Start Changing Your Parenting Approach. Marley, listen to me. You will bring your textbooks to the beach and it will be fun. I was trying to get this then 9-year-old to recognize how amazing it was that she could study and learn while laying mere feet from seawater so clear and captivating. She wasn't buying my fake ass enthusiasm. I was determined to stick to my story. But I don't want to bring my book, Mama. Her voice was low and steady, her big brown eyes firmly affixed on mine. She was used to textbooks and studying, and even enjoyed our trips to Barnes & Noble to get workbooks and pastries from the cafe inside the store. But now that we were in Jamaica, she was insistent that she would study at home, not at the beach, because the beach was solely and non-negotiably for play. Chris and I had this exchange with that kid maybe 3 times in the first few weeks after we arrived on the island for our first extended trip. She and our then 6-year-old Sage were on summer break, and we planned for 6 months on the island with the hopes that this might transition into a long-term thing. We had enrolled them in a virtual academy that had a physical base in the U.S. in Georgia, where we were based at the time. At my request, my mother shipped us the heavy-ass box of textbooks, and all of the pockets of our checked bags were already brimming with workbooks our daughters could use in between semesters at the virtual academy. We had our responsible parents plan in place, but our experiences spending our days with Marley and Sage would alter those plans in ways neither Chris nor I could have ever freaking imagined. Marley, you get to be here, not in school, which is so good, right? Yes, it is. She always held her chin a little higher when she suspected I was trying to run game on her. I was. And now you get to learn from books at home, just like you wanted, right? Yeah, Mama, but listen to me. No buts, Marley. I had to put my foot down and pull out my, oh, baby girl, you gonna do what I say do card. You will bring and use your book because you still have to learn. That was our regular exchange, and it had gotten to the point that Marley wasn't even whiny or worked up with her resistance. She was just firm. She didn't throw tantrums. She was just hella insistent that she was not cool with bringing textbooks with her when we left home. The problem was that we left home a lot. Jamaica is a place that always has something going on. A simple taxi ride to the beach might end up being a 4-hour experience chatting and laughing with strangers, being invited to eat another fish or drink another cup of something good, or to some other activity, which made it hard to just leave home, run an errand, and come back. That's exactly why she needed to bring her textbook. The way I saw it, she'd never get any studying in if she didn't bring it with her, and then she'd be the B word, behind. Of course, the exchanges always ended in her shouldering her bubblegum pink and cotton candy blue Dora the Explorer backpack filled with snacks, a sand shovel or two, and her textbook. She also shouldered me, lording over her and attempting to make sure she was covering whatever sections the academy had assigned for that week. Sage, being younger, had workbooks too, and she often resisted with a whiny, "But why?" But it was easier to keep her caught up with grade 1 and grade 2 work, so we didn't see her pushback as being as potentially detrimental to her learning as Marley's. "I don't even care if I'm behind, Mama." Marley was responding to my failed attempt at explaining how horrible it would be if not doing her textbook work caused her to fall behind. The skies were 3 shades of blue and a kiss of yellow, and the Caribbean Sea was on her usual sweet singing flow. I wanted nothing more than to open a cold red stripe and sop up my fried snapper with the bami and other savory goodness the seaside chef had heaped onto my piece of foil paper turned food tray. I was frustrated and losing my grasp on that feeling that I should talk to my children like people I loved and appreciated, not mere subjects in my queendom. My response was always to get sterner and less listening centered, especially because she and her sister had been deemed gifted and talented by the school, and I certainly didn't want to end up messing up their giftedness from lack of them studying the right things. Honestly, the fact that Marley and Sage were viewed as particularly smart was one of the reasons I was afraid to listen to, let alone honor their ongoing pleas to learn at home. So much of our perception of our daughters was rooted in what the school told us about them. If the test said they were exceptional, then it was Chris's and my job to make sure they stayed that way, which meant we needed to make sure we, the non professional educators, didn't ruin that by doing anything crazy like listening to our daughters when they said that they didn't want to study. Ironically, it was the gifted and talented label or the school's practices toward children they'd given these labels that prompted us to start paying more attention to our daughters' needs. I now scoff at those labels and see them as often, though perhaps not always, damaging and limiting, if not complete bullshit. To back up a bit, toward the end of kindergarten, the school asked us permission to test Marley for giftedness. Of course, this was exciting to Chris and me, and I personally felt like my efforts in my girls' earlier years with reading and writing were now showing up. It was about Marley, but when I look back, it was also very much about me. I didn't recognize that back then, but now I can see clearly that the adult gaze, which we'll talk about more for sure, was part of what was blocking our ears from listening to our daughters. Anyway, testing happened, labels were affixed, and the school, with our permission and excitement, set out to figure out a way to meet Marley where she was intellectually. This is when the first set of alarm bells started going off. We said yes to that set of tests, but it turns out they were giving Marley more tests than we agreed to, testing her in blocks of time without our knowledge, let alone our permission. One day, Marley came home crying because she had missed recess again. And that's how we found out she was being tested outside the times to which we'd consented. Her missing recess mattered deeply to her and to us, but not to her school. I made sure not to wear earrings that day. If you don't know the implications of that decision, ask Black women until you find one that can tell you with confidence. Anyway, we met with the offending parties the next day and told them it had to stop. They agreed, complied, and then began the work of scheduling meetings with us and the school's gifted teachers, as well as the school psychologist. I remember being in one group meeting and feeling very much like Chris and I were suspected of shady shit. By shady, I mean overworking her at home, making her study more than was healthy for a young child. People in the meeting were making statements like, kids need to be able to just play and be, not study all the time. She wasn't studying all the time. She did workbooks for about 30 minutes on the days she didn't have homework, as well as whenever she wanted to do workbooks. She enjoyed doing the math workbooks with Chris, and the other workbooks were usually puzzles or sticker books with topics she chose during our bookstore runs. It seemed to us that it wasn't fathomable that Marley enjoyed academics. Instead, it must have been us forcing her to do these things, and therefore, it must have stood to reason that she'd score so well on whatever battery of tests they ran. Though the school did some things we did not like, we loved the teachers. Marley and Sage's teachers were wonderful women who clearly loved the work they did. Marley's kindergarten teacher had asked us if we had other children and actively vied to get Sage in her class when she realized we did. In fact, have another child who was going to start school soon. Mrs. B looked out for our daughters and loved on them in ways that helped Chris and me feel comfortable that Marley's and then Sage's opposition to school had nothing to do with how they felt about their teachers or how their teachers felt about them. Fortunately, in our case, that love and care continued in varying ways with the various teachers with whom our girls engaged. One teacher said Marley was the type of child who reminded her why she got into teaching. Another teacher said that if all of her students were like Sage, she might not want to go home in the evenings because she'd want to spend all her time being with them. But what happened in school for Marley and Sage was not about their teachers. It was about the inherently damaging nature of forced, standardized curricula and a focus on studenthood over personhood. Their teachers, as engaged and caring as most of them were, had little more power than Marley and Sage or Chris and me over the structure of schooling and what it requires. As much as they saw Marley and Sage as children, school saw them as assets to develop, and that development called for choosing academics over personal needs and assertions every single time. One example of this is the school's recommendation after Marley's extensive testing bout, followed by trial runs in second, third, and fourth grade classes, to move Marley from the second grade gifted class, after being in first grade for a couple of months, into the fourth grade with no regard for the emotional and social aspects of sitting in a room full of older children and being the only 8, almost 9-year-old in the room. Out in the actual world, people who are a year or two apart in age aren't actually much different. In school settings, especially at the elementary or primary level, children in higher grade levels see themselves as vastly different from their younger, lower grade level student peers. Studenthood separates them, and Marley would need time to navigate the transition. The school didn't factor that in at all, though, and the sounding alarm here was that the focus was clearly, unapologetically, on academics, not on the little girl involved in all of it. In school, reaching for the heights of studenthood was far more important than personhood and emotional wellness. It was at that point that Chris and I began having conversations about it being our job to support and nurture personhood and emotional wellness. Perhaps even more importantly, we began to see pinholes in the notion that personhood and emotional wellness could be nurtured within the requirements of conventionally structured education. This is when Chris and I began asking the school fewer questions and started asking each other more questions. Notorious B.I.G.'s famous line about mad question asking became part of our regular mental soundtrack. I still use the term today because for us, it became a life skill and a lifeline back to our daughters and away from what their schooling was costing them. I define mad question asking, MQAs, if you feel an extra fly, you could call them that. I define MQAs as a process of questioning the intention behind your concern instead of questioning to try to resolve your concern. So MQAs seek out causes, whereas regular questions focus solely on addressing symptoms. Can the school help us raise a whole person? Or can they only help us gauge what she can handle academically? Should we be so focused on how much she can handle academically? And while we're addressing questions, why was Marley saying that she didn't like school anymore and that she wanted to be at home, do her workbooks, go to the bookstore, and watch Fetch with Ruff Ruffman, the television series that she called her favorite learning program? Those questions arose, and we talked through them. But at that time, Chris and I had become versed at being extensions of the school system, trusting its opinions and goals for our daughters above all. It's not as if we and the school put our heads together and decided what we wanted for her. No, the school said she was above and beyond and therefore could handle certain classes and environments, and we said, okay, let's see how we can implement this. We were just operating as arms of the school system instead of being Marley's support system. We had deified the school system. It was our true north. This shitty realization that we were operating like effective extensions of the school's ideas for Marley brought to light for us just how much we'd been ignoring or silencing her assertions in favor of the school's recommendations. She was asking about staying at home and learning at home while we were beginning to see the chasm of a gap between what we wanted her to experience, feeling supported, heard, challenged by people who wanted the best for her, and what she was actually experiencing, feeling silenced, pushed, frustrated, and treated like some exciting result in the making. Marley began upping her requests to stay at home and learn from her programs, the TV shows she loved, and her workbooks. I was working primarily from home by then, but I was totally not about that at-home teacher life. I had taught them how to read and how to write their names before they were 4 years old. And that's where I felt the depths of my teacher expertise ended. In discussing it over and over, it was clear neither Chris nor I were interested in enforcing a curriculum or checking work every day, and I felt really guilty about that truth. I also felt sure that as savvy and as educated as Chris and I were, we couldn't possibly know how to teach our daughters at home, especially because we were not at all motivated to do so. We wanted to want to, but we just didn't. We continued to look at ways to be more involved in the school system, joining the PTA board, volunteering at the school more often to offset its focus on academics over personhood. The more involved we became, the more we saw that we couldn't honor two directions at the same time. When Sage's time for school came along, her teacher said she saw similar signs of giftedness and asked permission to give her the same tests Marley had gotten, assigned her the same labels, engaged the same push towards academics, all while her quiet, likes to be alone personality amplified the school's lack of ability to honor a person's innate needs while helping them to learn in ways that felt encouraging and engaging to them. Sage would often talk about how the children and teachers would people on her and how she liked her teacher but was bored with the classroom. She was frustrated with the noise and the busyness and told us repeatedly that the time she spent at school every single day was, in her words, way too forever long. She wanted more time alone to do what she enjoyed. We couldn't see how that could hurt her, especially because she was vocal and curious, out loud, and loved books and relished using mixed materials to create robots and concepting machines that performed special tasks that she was happy to explain in great, and I do mean great, detail every time. She and I often shot videos where she'd explain her current project, robot, machine, or interest in great detail, some of which I still have on my old YouTube channel. She was engaged in so many aspects of her environment and her own thoughts, but back then, we didn't see that as enough. Still, even though we were still praying to the school gods, a new pattern was emerging. Our questions about our daughter's education were veering away from schooling and toward our children. Our concerns were more and more about our daughters as their own people and less about our daughters in relation to studenthood. We started looking at the pros and cons of our girls' educational path in its current form, and it became increasingly less feasible to ignore the ways the cons were towering over our perceived pros. For example, Marley, our social butterfly, loved being around other people, and everyone from the school nurse to the woman at the front desk knew Marley by name. She made it a point to visit them a few times per week on her way to wherever to tell them they were each doing a good job. And I know this because they all told me or Chris so. And since he and I were at the school all the damn time, sometimes at the same time, they had plenty opportunities to share these things with us. School for Marley, though filled with opportunities to meet her voracious appetite for peopling, was a constant source of frustration. She experienced what she repeatedly termed not having enough time to think her thoughts. She would talk about having watched an episode of Fetch with Rough Ruffman, but not having enough time to think about all the parts of it. She loved to dissect whatever kept her interest, and she kept demanding time to do more of that. She loved to write out her thoughts, to draw characters that thought her thoughts, and to read stories about people and their experiences. The more Chris and I talked and thought about our daughter's learning experiences, the more we realized that school wasn't actually the source of all their learning. This helped make it easier for us to listen to Marley and Sage's ongoing complaints about school, and we began to take their grievances seriously. We began to worry that dismissing their opinions about their learning might cause them not to trust themselves and their feelings. We weren't sure whether or not that was a bad thing because maybe they shouldn't trust themselves, being children and all. But it felt like something to keep paying attention to. So we did. And the more we paid attention to our daughters, the more cons we identified. Marley was losing her confidence. She got iffy about asking questions, often telling us she was worried about asking the wrong questions or being too tired to ask any questions at all. Sage shifted from being comfortably introverted to painfully shy. She had always been quiet in most public spaces, but at home, she was vibrant and inquisitive. After her time in school, that began to change. She seemed to get frightened more easily, even by slight noises. She seemed more sensitive to sound and light. She constantly complained about being peopled on, never adjusting to the rhythm of standing in line with her finger over her lip like a good student. I tried going to the school less because I thought maybe my presence there was making it harder for her to adjust. It didn't change anything. She said school made her sad. These definitive statements from Marley and Sage kept coming, and so did the encouragement from their school for us to do what we could to keep our daughters on this brilliant track to stellar studenthood. That same track Chris and I started out feeling sure was the best thing for our daughters. But if it was so good for them, why were they so resistant? We couldn't keep ignoring those conflicting messages, and that's when and why we decided we'd use the summer break to feel through something, hell, anything different than the conventional education path that we had chosen for our daughters. So before that summer ended, we withdrew them from school, reminding ourselves that if it didn't work out, we could always re-enroll them. I began researching alternatives to conventional elementary school, found that virtual academy I told you about earlier, and decided that their 4th and 1st grade years would be their last in school, at least for a while. And yes, even with all the questions we had, we still said yes to Marley moving to the 4th grade. Sage spent most of her first year and a half of elementary school going between 1st and 2nd grades, while Chris and I spent most of our time trying to figure out how to make sure the girls stayed ahead, but not to the detriment of the whole person needs they each had and had expressed to us. The virtual academy we settled on felt like a good start because it still had a K-12 curriculum, but the girls could integrate their studies with engaging, time-ignoring activities that centered their own curiosities and, of course, fun. We were still school-centered, just less so than before the girls started school. I say this because though the process to decide to withdraw took months and brought to light the ways our daughters' educational journeys were not healthy for them emotionally, we still essentially went from one master to another when we enrolled our daughters in a state virtual academy that followed the exact same K-12 standards as the school from which we'd freed them. Fortunately, our willingness to try something different brought new resources and realizations to the fore, as is the case in many aspects of life. Along with the months of research and questioning we were doing, another molasses slow process was being unearthed. The confines and heavy cost of lifestyle upkeep, a mortgage, a car payment, insurance for 2 vehicles, YMCA memberships, karate classes, gas prices, and a million little things in between. Chris and I had always loved to travel, but had resigned ourselves to believing that it was only possible in short, expensive spurts because children, because school, because money. However, after realizing that so much of our lives was confined to the school calendar and realizing we were, for the first time, free from that, we began exploring inexpensive travel options. We were both fully self-employed by then, and our projects just about covered our expenses. And more excitingly, didn't call for us to be in a particular location. We were web-based in terms of our careers, which meant we could reimagine our lives and our locations. We set out to find the least expensive means to spend about a month somewhere besides Georgia to simply see how that felt. We were fortunate to have cousins back home, Jamaica, who would rent us a small room inside their home. We couldn't rent that space and pay our mortgage though, so we decided we'd let our mortgage be late and just catch up as soon as we could. We needed to test this thing out, this way of living that allowed for virtual studies for Marley and Sage and the benefits of Chris and me already being based online in terms of serving our clients. We never needed to meet anyone in person. him being a creative branding specialist and graphic designer, and me being a freelance writer and emotional wellness coach. So, with the fear-facing and risk-taking, we found tickets to Jamaica within our measly budget, finalized our housing arrangements in Kingston, and went for it. That's how we ended up in that ongoing argument about beautiful beaches and necessary textbooks. Fine, Marley. I hadn't the energy or the desire to continue what had become our weekly unwanted ritual. You know what? Don't learn anything then. We'll take some time off so you girls can get a break, and then you'll come back to this without a single word besides, yes, mama. You hear me? Her little eyebrows were all furrowed and her bottom lip was starting to quiver. She was looking out past me at the water and didn't even seem relieved. Perhaps like me, she was tired of our regular exchange. Okay, she replied flatly. I told myself I'd explain to Chris what had happened, and then in a few weeks, we'd get back on track. Sage wasn't as resistant as Marley, but she was also younger, so we felt less afraid about her not learning what she needed to be learning. We felt more comfortable with her doing some workbooks a few times a week, accented by conversations and activities meant to ensure she was always learning something. When I talked to Chris, he was fine with the new plan, and as it turns out, our new plan paved the way for something completely unplanned, a way of living and learning together that felt natural and exciting, scary at times, but that was always showing us how little we knew about learning and how much we'd been conflating learning with schooling.